Have you ever felt the chilling grip of the unknown? Imagine being just 8 years old, lying on your couch, and suddenly feeling invisible hands squeezing your shoulders, leaving bruises and a lifetime of fear. In this video, I'll share the terrifying experience that changed my life forever, filled with mysterious reflections, shadowy figures, and the lingering dread that followed me for years. What would you do if you saw something in a mirror that shouldn't be there? How would you cope if you felt an unseen force grab you and leave marks? Stay with me as I recount every spine-tingling detail of that day, the strange incidents that followed, and the unresolved questions that still haunt me. If you love real-life horror stories and the paranormal, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another terrifying tale. Let's dive into this eerie experience together. When I was about 8 years old, something happened to me that I still can't explain. Now that I'm 18, the memory is as vivid as ever, and it still sends chills down my spine. It was an ordinary afternoon, and I was lying on the couch in our living room. The layout of our house was simple but cozy. The living room flowed into the dining room, and behind that was a corridor that led to the bathroom and bedrooms. My mom and grandma were with me that day. They were sitting in the living room, chatting and reading. My mom was on the armchair, flipping through a magazine, while my grandma was sitting at the dining table, reading the newspaper. The TV was on, playing some background noise, but the house was otherwise quiet and peaceful. I remember feeling comfortable and safe, just lounging on the couch, half watching TV and half daydreaming. It was the kind of day where nothing much happens, and you just enjoy the calm. Little did I know, that calm was about to be shattered. Behind the couch, the dining room table was set up neatly with chairs all around. A large mirror hung on the wall in the dining room, reflecting the living area. This mirror had always been there, a silent observer of our daily lives, and I never thought much about it until that day. The corridor behind the dining room was a bit dark, even during the day. It led to the bathroom and the bedrooms, creating a kind of dividing line between the lively part of the house and the quieter, more private areas. I never felt uneasy in the corridor before, but everything changed that afternoon. As I lay on the couch, I glanced at the mirror. I saw my grandma get up from her chair and walk towards the bedroom through the reflection. It was strange because I hadn't heard her move, but I didn't think too much about it. I got up from the couch and decided to follow her to see if she needed any help. I walked through the dining room and into the corridor. The light was dim, and everything seemed a bit hazy. When I reached the bedroom, it was empty. There was no sign of my grandma. Confused, I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what was going on. I turned around to head back to the living room. As I walked back, I glanced towards the bathroom door. In the reflection, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Before I could react, I felt a tight grip on my shoulders. It squeezed so hard that I fell to the ground. I looked around frantically, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I struggled to get up, my legs feeling weak and wobbly. Just then, my mom rushed over to me, her face filled with concern. What happened?" she asked, trying to understand my garbled words. I tried to explain, but I was so scared that my words came out in a jumbled mess. My mom thought I was playing a prank and started to laugh it off. But when she saw the fear in my eyes and the bruises forming on my shoulders, her expression changed to one of worry. She called my grandma over, and they both examined me closely. They found clear handprints on my shoulders, like someone had grabbed me with great force. Their faces turned pale, and they exchanged worried glances. They knew something wasn't right, but none of us had any explanation for it. From that day on, our house never felt the same. The place that was once filled with warmth and comfort became a source of fear and mystery. My mom and grandma tried to reassure me, but the marks on my shoulders and the memory of that tight grip never faded from my mind. I was lying on the couch that afternoon, feeling relaxed and at ease. The TV was on, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. My mom was sitting in the armchair, flipping through a magazine, and my grandma was at the dining table, reading the newspaper. Everything felt normal and calm. As I lay there, I glanced at the mirror hanging on the dining room wall. The mirror reflected the living room, and in it, I saw my grandma get up from her chair. She moved slowly and deliberately, heading towards the corridor that led to the bedrooms. It seemed strange because I hadn't heard her move or say anything. I watched her reflection for a moment, feeling a bit puzzled. Why hadn't I heard her get up? Why didn't she say anything? I decided to follow her to see if she needed any help. I got up from the couch and walked through the dining room, my footsteps soft on the carpet. The corridor was dimly lit, and it felt colder than the rest of the house. I walked down it, heading towards the bedroom where I had seen my grandma go. As I approached the door, I felt a strange sense of unease. The hallway seemed longer than usual, and the shadows felt thicker. When I reached the bedroom, I paused for a moment before pushing the door open. The room was empty. My grandma was nowhere to be seen. I stood there, confused, looking around the room for any sign of her. The bed was neatly made, and everything was in its place. It was as if no one had been there at all. I called out softly, "Grandma?" But there was no answer. I took a few steps into the room, feeling the cool air on my skin. I checked the closet and the bathroom, but there was no sign of her. My confusion grew, and a small knot of fear began to form in my stomach. I turned to leave the bedroom, my mind racing with questions. Where had she gone? Had I imagined seeing her get up? As I walked back towards the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt different, like it was holding its breath. When I reached the living room, I saw my mom still sitting in the armchair, and my grandma was back at the dining table, reading her newspaper as if nothing had happened. I stopped in my tracks, staring at them in disbelief. How could she be there when I had just seen her walk towards the bedroom? I walked over to my grandma, my heart pounding in my chest. "Grandma, did you go to the bedroom just now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me, her face puzzled. "No, dear. I've been sitting here the whole time," as she replied. A chill ran down my spine. I knew what I had seen, but her calm demeanor made me doubt my own eyes. I glanced back at the mirror, half expecting to see something else strange, but it only reflected the room as it always had. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and sat back down on the couch. My mom and grandma went back to their activities, but I couldn't focus. The image of my grandma walking towards the bedroom kept replaying in my mind. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't explain it. That was the moment everything started to change. The house no longer felt safe and familiar. There was a sense of something lurking just out of sight, something that defied logic and explanation. And deep down, I knew that whatever it was, it had only just begun to reveal itself. As I stood there, staring at my grandmother sitting calmly at the dining table, a wave of confusion washed over me. I had just seen her walk towards the bedroom, hadn't I? My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I turned away from her and looked back towards the corridor, hoping for some kind of explanation. It was then that I noticed something strange in the reflection of the mirror near the bathroom door. There was a shadowy figure, indistinct and blurry, standing just inside the frame. My heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew something was wrong. Before I could react, I felt a sudden tight grip on my shoulders. The pressure was intense, like iron hands squeezing me with all their might. I gasped, trying to twist away, but the grip only tightened. My vision blurred with fear, and I felt as if my entire body was being crushed. The sensation of being squeezed was overwhelming. It felt like my shoulders were being pushed into my chest, making it hard to breathe. My legs buckled under the pressure, and I fell to the ground, unable to support myself. I tried to call out for help, but no sound came out. The grip on my shoulders didn't lessen. I was pinned to the floor, struggling to move, but it was like being held down by an invisible force. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and confusion. What was happening to me? Why couldn't I see anything? I heard my mother's voice, distant and frantic, calling my name. Her words barely registered through the haze of fear that clouded my mind. I felt tears streaming down my face as I struggled against the invisible hands holding me down. Every muscle in my body was tense, fighting to break free. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the grip loosened, and I was able to take a deep breath. I lay there on the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling. My mother rushed over and knelt beside me, her face a mask of concern and confusion. What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. I tried to explain, but my words came out in a choked whisper. "Something grabbed me. I couldn't move," I managed to say, pointing weakly at my shoulders. My mother looked at me, then at my grandmother, who had come over to see what was wrong. Their expressions were a mix of disbelief and fear. My mother gently lifted me up and checked my shoulders. Her eyes widened when she saw the bruises forming in the shape of handprints. "Oh my God," she whispered, looking at my grandmother. "Did you see anyone?" My grandmother shook her head, just as bewildered as my mother. They helped me to the couch, and I sat there, feeling numb and shaken. The reality of what had just happened was sinking in, and I couldn't stop trembling. My mother and grandmother kept asking me questions, trying to understand, but I had no answers. All I knew was that something had grabbed me, something I couldn't see or explain. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I was too scared to move from the couch, afraid that whatever had attacked me might come back. My mother stayed close by, her worry evident in every glance she cast my way. My grandmother tried to comfort me, but her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by an edge of fear. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The memory of the tight grip on my shoulders played over and over in my mind. I felt a deep sense of dread, knowing that whatever had happened wasn't over. The house felt different now, darker and more menacing. I knew that this was just the beginning of something much more terrifying. When I fell to the ground, my mother's initial reaction was confusion. She rushed over, her face a mix of concern and disbelief. "What are you doing on the floor?" she asked, thinking I might be playing a prank or just being clumsy. But as she got closer and saw the look of terror on my face, her expression changed. I was shaking, tears streaming down my cheeks. As something grabbed me, I sobbed, clutching my shoulders. "It hurt me, Mom." I couldn't move. My voice was barely a whisper, but the fear in it was unmistakable. My mother knelt beside me, trying to calm me down, but I could see the worry in her eyes. At first, she tried to rationalize it. "Are you sure you didn't just trip and fall? Maybe you imagined it," as she suggested, her voice uncertain. But I shook my head violently. "No, Mom, it was real. Something grabbed me, and it wouldn't let go," I insisted, my voice cracking with fear. My grandmother came over, her face pale. She had heard the commotion and wanted to know what was happening. Together, they helped me sit up and tried to comfort me. But when my mother lifted my shirt to check my shoulders, she gasped. There, clear as day, were bruises in the shape of handprints. "Oh my God," as she breathed, her eyes wide with shock. My grandmother looked too, her hand covering her mouth. "Those look like hand marks," as she whispered, clearly shaken. They exchanged worried glances, realizing that something very real and very frightening had happened. Seeing their reactions made my fear even worse. I started crying harder, unable to control the sobs that shook my body. "I told you," I managed to say between sobs. "Something grabbed me, and it hurt me." My mother hugged me tightly, trying to calm me down, but I could feel her trembling too. They gently moved me to the couch, where I sat, still crying. My mother kept checking my shoulders, looking at the bruises in disbelief. How could this happen?" she muttered to herself. My grandmother sat beside me, holding my hand, her usual calm demeanor gone. We spent the next few hours trying to make sense of what had happened. My mother and grandmother asked me over and over to describe exactly what I felt, but my story didn't change. I could still feel the tight grip on my shoulders, the sensation of being pinned to the floor. My mother called my father at work, explaining what had happened. He came home as quickly as he could, his face pale with worry. He checked my shoulders too, seeing the bruises for himself. This doesn't make any sense," he said, shaking his head. How could this happen?" As the day went on, my fear didn't lessen. I stayed on the couch, too scared to move. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept glancing around, expecting to see something or someone. My parents and grandmother tried to reassure me, but I could tell they were just as scared and confused as I was. That night, my mother insisted I sleep in her room. She didn't want me to be alone, and honestly, I didn't want to be either. I lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house was dark and quiet, but I felt like something was watching me, waiting. The next morning, the bruises on my shoulders were even darker. My mother checked them again, her worry evident. "We'll figure this out," she promised, but I could see the fear in her eyes. None of us knew what had happened or why, but we all felt the same unease. The house, which had always been a place of comfort and safety, now felt different. There was a sense of something lurking in the shadows, something we couldn't see but could definitely feel. And I knew deep down that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that none of us could have imagined. After that day, everything changed for me. I became hyper-aware of reflections and shadows. Mirrors, which had once been just another part of the house, now seemed sinister. I avoided looking into them, afraid I might see something I couldn't explain. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The sense of fear and unease became a constant presence in our house. The once cozy and safe home now felt oppressive and dark. The air seemed heavier, and I always felt like I was being watched. I started keeping my bedroom light on at night, unable to sleep in the dark. The feeling that something might grab me again was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Minor incidents began to happen, adding to my fear. Sometimes, I would hear soft whispers in empty rooms or the faint sound of footsteps when no one else was around. Doors would creak open by themselves, and objects would be found in places where we hadn't left them. These occurrences were never as intense as the initial experience, but they were enough to keep me on edge. Once, I saw the reflection of a shadowy figure in the TV screen when it was turned off. I screamed, and my parents came running, but by then the figure was gone. They tried to reassure me, saying it was just my imagination, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They knew something was wrong, even if they couldn't explain it. Our dog Max also started acting strangely. He would growl at empty corners and refuse to enter certain rooms. His behavior only added to the sense of unease. If he sensed something was wrong, then we couldn't just dismiss it as my imagination. Animals had a way of sensing things that humans couldn't. The hallway where I had been grabbed became a place of terror for me. I avoided it as much as possible, always taking the long way around the house to get to my room. If I had to pass through it, I would run, my heart pounding in my chest. The memory of the tight grip on my shoulders haunted me. My schoolwork began to suffer because I couldn't focus. I was constantly tired, having spent most nights tossing and turning, too scared to sleep. My teachers noticed, and my parents had to explain that I was going through a tough time, but they didn't go into details. How could they explain something they didn't understand themselves? My sister also started to experience strange things. She would wake up in the middle of the night, claiming to have seen a figure standing at the foot of her bed. At first, I thought she was just trying to get attention, but the fear in her eyes was real. She started sleeping in my room, and we would huddle together, trying to find some comfort in each other's presence. My parents tried everything to make us feel safe. They called in an electrician to check the wiring, thinking the incidents might have a logical explanation. But everything was in order. They even considered moving, but we couldn't afford it at the time. We were trapped in a house that no longer felt like home. Despite their efforts, the fear lingered. It became a part of our daily lives, a shadow that followed us everywhere. Even during the day, the house felt wrong. It was as if we were living in a different place, one where the rules of reality didn't apply. The comfort and safety we once felt were gone, replaced by a constant sense of dread. I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they couldn't understand. They hadn't experienced what I had, and they looked at me like I was crazy. I stopped bringing it up, keeping my fear to myself. It was something I had to deal with alone, even though I knew my family was going through the same thing. Over time, we learned to live with the fear. It never went away, but we found ways to cope. We avoided the dark corners of the house, stayed out of the hallway, and kept the lights on. But deep down, I knew that as long as we lived there, the fear would always be a part of us, a reminder of the day when everything changed. Even now, years later, I still think about that day. The memory of those invisible hands grabbing my shoulders and the fear that followed have left a lasting impact on my sense of safety. What happened to me changed the way I see the world. I'm always on guard, always expecting something to happen. I still don't have any answers about what happened that day. Why did I see my grandmother's reflection walking towards the bedroom when she was actually sitting in the dining room? What was that force that grabbed me and left bruises on my shoulders? These questions haunt me, and I doubt I'll ever find a clear explanation. Living with the fear has become a part of who I am. I'm cautious and wary, always alert to my surroundings. I avoid mirrors and dark corridors, and I never stay alone in a room if I can help it. The events of that day have made me hyper-aware of anything that seems out of the ordinary. Whenever I see something unsettling, my immediate reaction is to leave. It's my way of coping with the lingering fear. I've learned that it's better to be safe than sorry. If something feels wrong, I trust my instincts and remove myself from the situation. It's the only way I can manage the anxiety that still lingers. My family and I eventually moved out of that house, but the fear followed us. Even in our new home, I find myself on edge, especially at night. The new house is different, but the memories of the old one are hard to shake. The sense of dread has become a shadow that's hard to escape. Talking about it with my sister helps. She went through it too, and she understands my fears. We often reminisce about the old house, trying to make sense of what happened. But the more we talk about it, the more we realize that some things might never be explained. My parents tried their best to make us feel safe, but I know they were scared too. They saw the bruises on my shoulders, heard the strange noises, and witnessed the changes in our behavior. They did everything they could to protect us, but some things were beyond their control. I've tried researching similar experiences, looking for stories that might offer some insight. I've read about hauntings and paranormal activities, but nothing quite matches what we went through. It's frustrating not having answers, but I've come to accept that some mysteries remain unsolved. Reflecting on the incident, I realize how much it has shaped me. I'm more cautious and less trusting of the unknown. The sense of safety I once had is gone, replaced by a constant awareness of potential threats. It's not a pleasant way to live, but it's my reality. I've learned to cope by staying alert and trusting my instincts. If something feels off, I don't hesitate to leave. It's a simple rule, but it has helped me manage the fear. I know I can't change the past, but I can control how I react to the present. The incident in that house will always be a part of me. It's a reminder that the world can be a scary and unpredictable place. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I've faced my fears and come out the other side, still standing. And that gives me the strength to keep going, no matter what happens next.